Our father would start ignoring my needs in favor of Allie's, and if I needed something, I would have to take care of it myself. Honestly, I think the reason he liked my sister so much more than me is because Allie looks so much like him. I think that gives him a sense of pride and connection with her. And while there were never any pictures of our mother around the house, I was always certain that I resembled her fairly well. My name is Daniel, and I'm 20 years old. I'm in a good place now, but when I was growing up, my father always made me feel like I was never good enough. He always made me feel like I was second best to my younger sister, Allie. In his eyes, Allie could do no wrong, and everything that she did was perfect. Our mother wasn't in the picture for much of our lives. After Allie was born, our father moved us to a new town, and it's been the three of us ever since. I never knew why our mother wasn't around until recently. Growing up, my father never liked to talk about her. He would get mad if either one of us brought it up, but he would never punish my sister for asking about her. If I ever brought up the subject, he would scream and shout at me about being ungrateful for what he's done for us. As a child, I never really thought much about it until we both started to get older. Our father would start ignoring my needs in favor of Allie's, and if I needed something, I would have to take care of it myself. Honestly, I think the reason he liked my sister so much more than me is because Allie looks so much like him. I think that gives him a sense of pride and connection with her. And while there were never any pictures of our mother around the house, I was always certain that I resembled her fairly well. Given how our father never liked to mention our mom, I guessed that my existence was just a bitter reminder of his ex that he hated with a passion. I used to think that if I was just a good student and kept my grades up, soon enough our father would slowly start to like me as much as he liked Allie. While she was making friends and goofing off after school, I kept my focus on my studies and did the best I could in all my classes. I got perfect grades all throughout school, and I was always proud of myself for that. But our father never seemed to care. Even though we were older, he still only cared about Allie. He supported her going out whenever she wanted, and sometimes would even give her money to buy what she wanted while she was with her friends. He never even so much as glanced at my grades or cared about what I was doing in school.
Dad?
Yes, my dear?
My friends and I wanted to go out again this weekend, but I'm going to need some money if we go shopping.
Of course. Take what I have in my wallet.
Thank you, Dad.
Have fun with your friends. Dad, what is it now? I got a perfect grade on all my final exams, and my dream colleges are showing interest in me. So what? Why are you bothering me with this? And I thought you'd be proud of me. Why should I be proud of you? You've always been a disappointment. But I'm a great student, and I'm a responsible son. You'll never be as important as Allie. I was beyond disappointed and hurt to hear that. I just wanted to be as important to our father as Allie was, but it was becoming clearer that that would never be possible. Allie never treated me like our father did. Sometimes when she would go out, she would invite me along, and occasionally brag about my grades to her friends. Unlike our father, Allie made an effort to be kind to me and make me feel like I was cared about. But she also had her own life and her own friends, so no matter how well she treated me, it wouldn't do much to erase how much disdain our father had for me. It was at its worst during high school. Allie started dating the richest boy in the school, and our father was excited to learn of the relationship. He kept badgering her about his family and about all the money they have. Meanwhile, I was busy trying to apply to colleges and get into school somewhere else. I thought getting my education and leaving my father behind would do me a lot of good. But when I looked at my college fund, I found that it had been drained of every dollar I'd put into it. I couldn't understand what had happened. I'd been saving up for school for years. I counted all the money I added. There was no possible way I didn't have any money to pay for college. At least, that was what I thought until I spoke to Allie. This is awful. My college fund is completely empty.
What? That can't be possible.
That's what I thought too, but just look for yourself.
How did Dad let this happen? He's got so much money saved up. You should have something here.
What money? Dad doesn't have all that much.
Really? He always has enough for me, and he keeps getting money from my boyfriend's family. There should be plenty for you.
Dad never has enough money for anything I do.
That's so weird.
It wasn't until I confronted our father about it that I learned the truth. He'd taken everything out of my college fund to pay for Allie's outings with her friends. I couldn't help the immense amount of anger I felt when I heard that. Allie was perfect to him, and he gave her everything she ever wanted. And it turns out she had also used all of my college money for her friends. Oddly enough, he went on to say that the main reason that he had taken my money was that he was angry that I was making plans to go off to school, and that he didn't want me to, as it could look like I was doing better than Allie. He wanted to prop her up so much that he figured the best way to do it was to hold me back and ruin me, rather than trying to motivate her to do better. It was so illogical. He hated me so much and loved Allie so much that he just wasn't seeing reason. I knew I couldn't really be mad at my sister. She didn't know, and she always treated me well. But it was unfair to me, and it was how our father had been treating me my entire life. I got sick of it, and I knew I had to get out of the house as quickly as possible. Just days after graduation, I found a nearby apartment to live in. It was small and not great, but I didn't have a lot of money at the time, and I needed to get out of the house quickly, and that was the only place available. Besides, once I got a job and saved up more money, I could move into a better place. I told Allie where I was, but otherwise stopped talking to our father altogether. The strange thing about that is, cutting him out kind of hurt. He's never treated me with respect or given me any kind of affection or recognition, but at the same time, he's the only parent I've ever known. He's the one who kept a roof over my head and kept me in school for so long. That made it difficult to feel good about leaving him and Allie behind, even if he never cared about me. Regardless, after I got my own apartment, I worked on getting a job as quickly as possible. It was as a waiter at a restaurant, and I had to work all day long, but it paid me every week, and I was able to afford rent every month. It would have to do until I could get another higher-paying job. After several weeks of searching for another job, I found one that I thought would be a perfect match. It was an entry-level job at a tech company that had just moved into town that month. I wasn't expecting to hear back so soon, but just a few days after I applied, they called me back for an interview, and it went well. I got the job, and I was able to quit working at the restaurant I was working at before. The new job also gave me more free time, which I would use to search for my mother. After leaving my father behind, I'd become increasingly curious about finding out who my mom was and why they had separated when Allie and I were children. I didn't have any memories of her, and now that I didn't have a parental figure in my life, I wanted to see who she was and what she was like. My old job kept me at work for long hours that I'd hardly have any time at all once I got back. One day, to my surprise, my boss called me into her office and sat me down. I was nervous. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong.
I understand you've been using company time for a personal project of yours?
Just this once. And only for a few minutes. I promise it won't happen again.
Would you mind explaining what you were doing on company time?
I was looking for my mother. My parents divorced when I was young, and I don't remember what she was like. I just wanted to know, and it got the better of me today. I apologize. As it turned out, I didn't have to apologize for what I'd been doing. My boss revealed that she was my birth mother, and that she'd been looking for me and Allie for years now. She asked me what it had been like to be raised by my father, and she listened when I explained what I'd gone through. After I was done, she became enraged and promised to get Allie out of that house too. It was fairly easy when she filed for custody, and we found out that the reason our father had used my college fund and the money from the family of Allie's boyfriend was because of all the gambling debt he got himself into while Allie and I were growing up. Allie's boyfriend was pretty upset to hear about that, and he ended up breaking up with her because of it. She was upset about that, but she was mostly angry at our father for what he'd been doing. The judge awarded our mother custody over Allie, and we both moved in with her. Turns out this is the 5th company she started, and she does very well for herself. Allie and I can't really complain about how our lives turned out. As for our father, once he didn't have access to money, the people that he owed money to came after him and beat him up pretty badly. They even stole his car and drove it into a lake to send him a message. In the end, he was forced to flee town, or else possibly be killed by them. Since then, he has been calling Allie and me and begging us for money so that he can pay off his debts and get back on his feet, but we've both sworn off ever helping him. The last time that he called, he He told us that he was living on the streets and was begging people for money just so he could eat.
My name is Anna, and my parents have always loved my older sister, Cassie, more than they ever loved me. Cassie has always been their golden child who could do no wrong, whereas I was always an afterthought. Sometimes it's like they forgot I even existed. Most years they wouldn't remember my birthday, while Cassie got the biggest celebrations and everything she wanted. Anything I did went ignored by my parents. My grades were perfect, and I was described. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? I've felt that way my entire life. My name is Anna, and my parents have always loved my older sister, Cassie, more than they ever loved me. Cassie has always been their golden child who could do no wrong, whereas I was always an afterthought. Sometimes it's like they forgot I even existed. Most years they wouldn't remember my birthday, while Cassie got the biggest celebrations and everything she wanted. Anything I did went ignored by my parents. My grades were perfect, and I was described by my teachers as a great student. But that wasn't enough for my mom and dad. Cassie was always prettier and more popular, which made our parents look good, so they let her get away with whatever she wanted. They went so far as to throw her the biggest parties with the most expensive gifts, while they hardly remembered my birthday most of the time. I remember one year I tried to remind them that my birthday was coming up. It didn't go well. Mom? Dad?
What do you want?
I was wondering if we could go out for my birthday this year. My parents looked at one another in confusion, and I knew they'd forgotten my birthday again. I should have been used to it at that point, but even after so many years of being ignored, it still stung.
You already celebrated this year, haven't you?
No. My birthday's this weekend, and I was thinking that
This weekend. That's not right. That's Cassie's birthday.
if it wasn't bad enough that my parents forgot my own birthday, they would also mistake it for Cassie's birthday and throw her another party. And Cassie herself never seemed to care. She could do whatever she wanted, and our parents would always take her side, so she got away with everything. As I got older, she started going out of her way to taunt me, always making jokes and comments about how I wasn't good enough for our family. There were times she would do it right in front of Mom and Dad, and they never cared. As the less popular child, I didn't have a lot of friends in school, so I had nobody to talk to. I knew what was going on wasn't normal, but I couldn't tell anyone about it. The only thing that distracted me from my feelings of loneliness and helplessness was the thought of going to college. I would be away from my family and everything they put me through, and I would be able to make friends and get the job I've been dreaming about since I was a kid. The years passed, and I kept my grades up, so the colleges I applied to were sure to let me in. I even managed to participate in a couple of extracurriculars. By the time I graduated high school, I was at the top of my class. My family wasn't there, and the seats reserved for my parents and Cassie were empty. I didn't care, though. I'd been accepted into college a week before, and I was going to leave my tragic home life behind me. At least, that's what I thought. Then I got home. I told my parents that I was going up to my room to pack, but their questions stopped me in my tracks.
Pack for what?
College? I got accepted into my first choice last week. The school year starts in a few months.
You're not going to college.
What? Why not?
You can't afford it.
Yes, I can. I'll use my college fund and get financial aid.
You don't have a college fund. You never did. How?
I couldn't believe what I heard. I knew my parents had been saving up money for Cassie to go to college, so I thought they had done the same for me. Turns out I was wrong. That can't be true. Cassie has a college fund, but she's not even going to school.
Cassie needs the money.
Why? It's not like she's going to use it on anything valuable, just more parties and expensive shopping trips.
How dare you? She's the older sister. Her needs are more important.
Something inside of me snapped that night. I had always wanted to go to college. I was the good kid with perfect grades, and I just found out that I couldn't afford to go. I was stuck at home being the unloved child, while Cassie got to do whatever she wanted. I wasn't about to accept that. Without another word, I marched up to my room and packed my bags. Even though I didn't have the money to attend college, I still had some money saved up from the jobs I took while in school. It wasn't my first choice, but I'd be able to afford a small apartment somewhere away from my family. And with my experience, I'd be able to find a steady job soon after. It would take me quite a while to save up, and yet I didn't care. As long as I could get into college, it would be worth it. A couple of years passed, and I made my job work. I was a dedicated employee, and my boss recognized that, giving me a promotion with a big raise. I had cut my family out of my life entirely, and every day I woke up happier and happier for it. Since moving out, I was no longer being tormented by others, and I was able to make friends at work. One of these friends would introduce me to one of the executives at the publishing house in town. Ever since I was a kid, I'd wanted to work in publishing and help authors get their stories out into the world. I made sure to leave a good impression on the executive, and a few weeks later I got a call asking if I'd be interested in working for the publishing house. Of course, I said yes, and soon after that I was working my dream job. During the publishing process, I met one of the authors that worked with the publishing house, and we hit it off. We started dating a few weeks later. Not long after that, one of his books started to get more and more popular and he got more attention. I didn't think much of it until one day I got a couple visitors while at work. When I went to see who it was, I was shocked to find my parents there.
Anna, it's wonderful to see you again.
What do you want?
We wanted to see you again.
We noticed that you're doing very well for yourself. A good job, a famous boyfriend.
That why you're both here? To flaunt me and my success around like you did with Cassie?
That isn't true. We care about you.
No, you don't. You never cared about me. You just want to look like your good parents because I became successful. You don't want anything to do with me. You never did, just like how I want nothing to do with you. My parents have always been that way. They want to look like good parents instead of actually being good parents. That was the reason why Cassie was always their favorite. Being popular and pretty gets a lot of attention, and it always made our parents look good. Well, I wouldn't let my parents use my success as a way to boost their public image, and I once again cut off contact with them. As it turned out, the reason they found me again to begin with was because Cassie had caused them a massive amount of embarrassment back home, and lost all the money they had set aside for her. After I left, Cassie spent all the money on a sports car and a luxurious trip for her and her friends. They ended up getting into a minor crash on the way. Everybody was okay, but Cassie got in some major trouble for the incident. When the police responded to the crash, they found Cassie acting weird, and then realized she was either drunk or on drugs. So they took her to the station and tested her and found that she was indeed on drugs. They showed her no sympathy, and she ended up spending a few months behind bars while my parents had to pay huge amounts of money as compensation to the city, as Cassie had caused a lot of damage to light poles and one of the city's parks. Everybody started looking to our parents and criticized them for letting her get in that kind of trouble to begin with. They were so desperate to salvage their reputation that they sought me out after a few years without contact. I guess they thought if they sucked up to me and told me what I wanted to hear, then I'd let them back into my life, and they could use my success to feel like good parents again. But I knew better. Cassie tried to talk to me again, too. She didn't apologize for the way she treated me, instead asking if there was some kind of job I could get for her. Since the accident she was in, nobody back home wanted to hire her. Her name carried a bad reputation, and they didn't want to take the chance on her. I told her no, that if she ever wanted to be a part of my life, then she would need to apologize for everything she did to me and become a better person. She refused, and I cut her off again, just like I did with our parents. But then I got a great idea, and I went to my boyfriend and asked for him to write a story about my life, but to make it with some supernatural twists so that it was a bit more interesting. In it, he made my sister and parents the villains, and after the success of his first book, this one took off and became incredibly popular. Within weeks of it going public, my family contacted me once again.
Anna, you need to get that boyfriend of yours to stop selling this book. Everyone knows it's a story about us. All our friends and coworkers are making fun of us and looking down their noses at us.
I don't know what you're talking about. It's just a work of fiction.
No, Anna, it isn't. Sure, there is some stuff in there that's fiction, but everyone knows that it's loosely based on us. Come on, you're making us look bad.
They're right. The accident was bad enough, but because of this, not only can I not get a job, but no boy will date me. They're all afraid that I'll treat them badly, and they all think I'm a trash person. Please have some compassion.
Compassion? You can't be serious. Compassion isn't something the three of you understand. Listen, the three of you did this to yourselves. You treated me terribly, and now this is your just desserts. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do. It hasn't been easy making a good life for myself. It was scary moving to a new town and getting a new job. I had to work long days and nights to get noticed by my boss, and I worked even harder to prove myself when I was offered my dream job. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel.
I threw open the door and found my wife in bed and having sex with Chad. Somehow they hadn't noticed me, and I turned and ran out of there and went straight home. I couldn't believe it. My wife was cheating on me, and her family was covering for her. Enraged, so I am looking at getting a divorce, and I have to say that although it really came out of nowhere, that honestly, I think that I'll be just fine once it's over and done with. So let me just start off by saying that I know that I'm nowhere close to perfect, but I truly do try my best to be a good person. So when my soon-to-be ex-wife's family did what they did, it really hurt me a lot, and I felt like I had no better option than to divorce my wife immediately. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hi, my name is Ryan, and I've been married to my wife Mary for a little over 5 years now. We used to talk about having children when we first got married, but over the years Mary has changed her mind and no longer wants to have them, which used to make me upset. But I eventually just accepted that so long as I was married to her, that would just be how things were. When we first got married, we were so madly in love, but my new in-laws really didn't approve of me. On the day of our wedding, they made it abundantly clear that they hated me. I can't believe my only daughter is marrying someone as hideous as you. Excuse me?
Yeah, he's nowhere as amazing as Chad was. Why on earth did she ever break up with him anyways?
Although their words hurt, I chose to ignore them and just do my best to enjoy the day. Thankfully, right after the ceremony, I didn't interact with them for the rest of the day, and I was able to really just celebrate the start of a long and loving relationship. Or at least that's what I thought. A few months after we were married, my in-laws began to openly say more hurtful things. Mary did try to defend me sometimes, but just as often, she would simply ignore them and let them insult me.
Oh, Mary, you really should keep an eye on what Ryan is eating. He's gained so much weight.
Yeah, and he's balding too. Such a shame. Did you know that Chad entered a bodybuilding competition last week?
Dad, stop bringing Chad up. I don't want to make Ryan feel insecure.
I couldn't understand why they kept bringing up Chad all the time. I had seen photos of him and he was very attractive, but as far as I knew, he was a massive jerk. Mary had never really told me why they had actually broken up, but I just figured that she was with me now. She had agreed to marry me, so it would be silly of me to be jealous of someone that she had once dated, in spite of the fact that her parents and even her sister thought that I wasn't good enough for her. And so, the years passed by. My wife and I worked on our careers, and we both benefited from that, until my wife's company suddenly began downsizing and they let her go. Up to that point, she had been the breadwinner of the family since she made more than double what I did, and the loss of her income definitely made things harder around the house, but we managed to make do. As a favor to my wife, though, we didn't mention to anyone that she had lost her job, as she was so embarrassed that she had lost such a high-paying career and was now forced to try to find another company that would hire her and pay her a similar salary, and unfortunately, she wasn't very successful. Around that time, my own company began making some big changes to the structure of the company, and I got really worried that they might do something similar to what my wife's company had done, but there was nothing I could really do at the time. Instead, I just had to hope for the best and try to remain positive. One day, my sister-in-law showed up at our house and asked if I wanted to go out for coffee. It was a rather odd request, but I assumed that maybe she needed to talk to me about my wife's upcoming birthday. That maybe she wanted to plan a surprise birthday party, and that she wanted to include me in the planning of it. However, as soon as we got to the coffee shop, she barely said anything to me and just spent the entire hour that we were there on her phone. When I tried to ask why she had invited me to go have coffee with her, she shrugged and just said that she felt like it. Confused, I went home and just shrugged it off as something very unusual. But a week later, my mother-in-law did the exact same thing, and just like with my sister-in-law, she spent the entire hour on her phone and barely said anything to me. Once was bad enough, but a second time was too much for me to just sit idly by and not say something. What's going on here? Last week, Taylor did this exact same thing. And now this week, you ask me out for coffee, and then we sit in silence for an hour? Is this some kind of weird test? Like, what exactly is going on?
Oh, nothing. Just some family stuff that we are trying to work out. We'll be able to tell you soon, hopefully, if everything works out.
I was so incredibly confused, and when I got home, I noticed that Mary was out of the house, and so I waited for her to get home to tell her about how odd her family was acting. The second she came in the door, though, she smelled heavily of cologne, and not one that I wore. My trouble detector began going off. Hey, sweetheart, where did you go?
Oh, just out. I went shopping with my sister.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask her what she bought or where she went so I could try to catch her in a lie. There was something going on and I knew that I could just be paranoid, but something deep down told me that I wasn't. And so, despite the fact that it was an invasion of privacy, I put a phone tracker on my wife's phone when she was asleep, and then I waited. Sure enough, the next week, my sister-in-law asked me to join her for coffee, and just like before, she just sat across from me and didn't say a word. And so, I figured now would be a good time to see where my wife was, and I was surprised to see that she was at my in-laws' home. Please excuse me for a few minutes. I need to use the facilities.
Yeah, whatever. I'll be waiting here.
With her face buried in her phone, she didn't notice when I stood up and walked out of the diner and to my car. Without a second thought, I drove over to my in-laws' house and saw a strange car in their driveway. I rushed into their house and instantly noticed that no one was home, except I heard noises coming from my wife's old bedroom. I threw open the door and found my wife in bed and having sex with Chad. Somehow they hadn't noticed me, and I turned and ran out of there and went straight home. I couldn't believe it. My wife was cheating on me, and her family was covering for her. Enraged, I called up a lawyer and demanded that they draft up divorce papers so that I could serve my wife with them as soon as she got home. I then called a locksmith to come out and change the locks on all of the doors to the house, and then packed up all of Mary's clothes and toiletries, and then waited for Mary to come home. When she did, she began pounding on the front door mercilessly and kept ringing the doorbell. I threw open the front door and then threw all of her belongings at her. Once she was covered in her own belongings, I let her have it. I can't believe that after all the love and support that I've given you, that you would just throw it all away for Chad. How dare you?
What are you talking about?
Don't lie to me. I saw you having sex with Chad at your parents' house in your old bedroom. I had trust and faith in you, and you just threw that all away. And for what exactly? She really didn't have an answer for me and just hung her head in shame.
Sorry. But my family just really likes him more, and he's so good-looking too.
That was it. That was all I needed to hear, and so I slammed the door right in her face. Within a week, I had served her divorce papers, and we were forced to go to court a month later. Thankfully, the judge thought that because of her previous work experience and the fact that she had cheated on me, that I should be entitled to the house as well as a small monthly alimony payment. It wasn't much, but it made paying the bills a lot easier. Not long after that, my work contacted me and made me an amazing offer. As part of their restructuring, they wanted to know if I would be interested in taking a managerial position at one of their branches in a different country. The salary would be nearly double what I currently made, and they would help with all moving expenses. It really didn't take much thought for me to accept, and to then sell my house and move to this new country. Amazingly enough, the amount that I got for my house went really far, and I was able to buy a much bigger house near to my new office. My first week there, I instantly knew that it was the right thing to do, as I truly enjoyed my new role in the company, and they had even promised me that if things went well, that I could potentially even be promoted to higher up positions. Things were really beginning to look up for me, and then I got a phone call that I never would have expected. My ex-mother-in-law called me.
Hey, Ryan, listen. We're really sorry about how things went down between you and Mary. I understand that you're probably hurting and feeling really lonely without her, and I wanted to see if you would be willing to take her back and ask her to forgive you for this whole divorce nonsense. How about it?
Are you insane? She cheated on me. As far as I'm concerned, she's Chad's problem now, not mine. And I'm not lonely or feeling all that hurt. I'm in a much better place now than when I was married to her. I make twice what I did and have a massive and fancy house. Why on earth would I take your daughter back? I instantly hung up the phone, but no sooner had I done that than my ex-sister-in-law called me next. I just let it go to voicemail. It went on like that for close to an hour before they finally stopped. As it turned out, My ex-wife's sister and mother had indeed conspired to have Chad pay my ex-wife a visit while I was occupied. They then took turns to distract me while Chad and my ex-wife could become intimate. They had thought that Chad was wealthy and that since my ex-wife made so much money, that the two of them would be a perfect match. However, what they didn't know was that my ex-wife was unemployed, or for that matter, that Chad was too. In fact, Chad was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and was hoping that my ex-wife would bail him out. But of course she couldn't. Once Chad had realized that Mary was poor, he abandoned her without so much as a second thought. Mary was devastated, homeless, and miserable, and wanted desperately for me to take her back. By that time, I had less than zero interest in her and wanted nothing to do with her. I had started dating a woman that lived close by. Her name is Janice, and things were still new, but we had so much in common and had a lot of similar long-term life goals. One of which was to have a child. I've been burned in the past, but this time it feels different. Almost like Janice is my one true soulmate even. Mary still calls every now and then to beg me to take her back, or to ask for money, but I always just laugh at her and tell her that she had done this to herself. That usually makes her angry enough that she won't call for at least a couple of weeks, which is just fine by me. Knowing that she is really struggling now does make my more vindictive side feel justified, but what do you think? Should I have forgiven her?
Angry, I tried to walk away, but Lawrence reached out and held me in place and wouldn't let me leave, and so I elbowed him in the nose, and then when he was stunned, I kicked him as hard as I could between the legs and left, and went over to my father's house. Hi there, my name is Kami, and my husband Lawrence is the cheapest man on the planet. Now I know how that sounds. Some of you don't believe me while the others are questioning why I would stay with him since I know that he is so cheap. But he wasn't always like this. When we first started dating, he was frugal, but he was much more reasonable. Like he would cut out coupons from the flyers that would come to our home and use them to get discounts on things. It was kind of nice, actually, as he managed to get us some pretty good deals sometimes. He was also really good at bargaining, and when it came time buying big-ticket items, he was always the kind of person that you wanted to negotiate for you. When we bought our first car together, he had somehow managed to convince the dealership to not only give us a free spare set of tires, but had them knock off an extra $3,000 off the price. I still have no idea how he did it, but he did. It was because of stuff like that that made me not mind that he was cheap so much. Sometimes he went overboard, but it also sometimes came in handy. I would often wonder how he had become so concerned with money, and he told me that when he was a child that his family was dirt poor, and that he vowed that he would never allow himself to have to live through that ever again, and had become money savvy in order to make sure he kept his vow. That is until one day when I sent him shopping with a long list of items that we really needed, and he came home with nearly nothing. Lawrence, I sent you to buy groceries. You were gone for over 4 hours and you barely bought anything. What happened?
Well, I got there and everything just cost too much money. Can you believe what they expect you to pay for some things?
Yeah, but you could have bought the store brand items. That would have saved some money. Where is the toothpaste or shampoo?
Those are some of the most expensive things. They had to go.
But we need them, Lawrence. What are we supposed to do without them?
Don't worry. There was a huge sale on hand soap. We'll just use that.
I just stared at him in disbelief. He actually expected me to brush my teeth with hand soap. Using it on my hair was bad enough, but to put that goop in my mouth was a step too far. I went to the store and bought all the things that he didn't buy, and when I got home, we had a huge fight. It was the first time in our marriage that we had fought like that, and afterwards he apologized and said that he wasn't sure what had gotten into him that made him make such odd choices. For a while, he got back to his normal routine. He would still be a bit cheap, but he didn't make any more crazy purchases. So, at the time, I just thought that it was a one-off occurrence, although I worried about what could have caused it. After all, maybe something could trigger it again and then who knows what he might do. Sadly, I would find out all too soon. There was a really bad flu going around, and even though I tried my best to avoid catching it, I unfortunately encountered someone that had it and caught it. It was absolutely awful. I was coughing constantly, and my fever was incredibly high. Between coughs and the throbbing of my headache, I begged Lawrence to go and get me some painkillers. I needed something to help get my fever down, and I was afraid that if I didn't, that I would need to go to the hospital. However, I was in no shape to go to the pharmacy, and Lawrence was too cheap to pay for the delivery fee for them to bring the medication out to us. But thankfully, Lawrence promised that he would take care of it and grabbed the car keys and went out. I'm not really sure how long he was gone for, as I was drifting in and out of being conscious. Suddenly, Lawrence showed up and offered me some pills. I was desperate, and so I didn't even look at them and just swallowed them with some water. 4 hours later, my fever was just as bad, and I was beginning to get concerned. Lawrence, however, promised that the medication would begin to work soon. He was my husband, and so I trusted him and took the pills. After I did, he walked around the room and checked the garbage pails. It was so confusing to me until he spoke.
You're using a lot of tissues. You know those things aren't cheap, right?
Lawrence, I'm sick. I can barely stay awake. If I need to use them, I will.
Well, maybe you can try to limit yourself to how many you use, or reuse them more than once. We aren't made of money, Kami.
I just ignored him, and eventually I think that he thought that I had fallen asleep. But before he left the room, he took the box of tissues with him so that I couldn't use any more of them. Not long after that, however, my stomach began to hurt, and I could feel my fever worsening. It was so bad that I began to hallucinate, but I was lucid enough to beg my husband to take me to the hospital, but he just kept saying all I needed to do was take more medication. Reluctantly, I did, but after I swallowed the pills, I went and hid in the bathroom and called my father. Dad, can you please come and take me to the hospital?
Kami, of course I can. Is everything okay? What about Lawrence?
Lawrence is here, but he just thinks I need to take this medication that he bought, and I think it's just making things worse. I have a terrible flu and my fever is dangerously high.
I will be there in 5 minutes.
I left the bathroom and went and sat on the porch until my father arrived. Honestly, though, I had no idea what time that he showed up, though, as I passed out, and then woke up in a hospital bed with a bunch of tubes going into my arms. I could hear some beeping sounds of the machines around me and the shuffling around of people's feet. Looking around, I saw Lawrence sulking in the corner. He had a black eye, a split lip, and sever cuts and scrapes on his face. Lawrence? What happened to me and what happened to you?
It's your fault.
What do you mean? Why am I in a hospital bed?
Your stupid father attacked me after he took you here. Why did you call him?
Because my fever was getting worse. Lawrence was so upset that he stormed out of the room. An hour went by and my father came in and told me that he found me passed out on the porch and he rushed me to the hospital. The doctors there demanded to know what medication I had been taking and my father couldn't tell them, but as it turned out, it was some kind of knockoff brand that was sold essentially by a drug dealer. It cost next to nothing and my husband had bought it to save a few dollars. Well, his plan backfired and the drugs that he had bought had caused my kidneys to shut down. If my father hadn't taken me to the hospital, I would have died. Thankfully, they were able to flush the drugs out of my system and put me on medication that finally brought my fever down and helped me fight off the flu. Okay, but why is Lawrence all beat up though?
After the doctors told me that it was the medication that Lawrence gave you that almost killed you, I lost it and attacked him. He promised not to press charges, so long as we don't press charges against him for the medication.
I was furious with Lawrence. This was now the second time that his being cheap negatively affected our marriage. And on top of it all, I nearly died as well. When I felt well enough, I called Lawrence and demanded that he apologize for what he did, and that if he didn't, that I would divorce him. It must have scared him enough because he apologized like I had never seen anyone do before. He spent the next months nursing me back to health and apologizing to me every day for what he had done to me. Once again, I thought that that would be the last time that that behavior would rear its ugly head, but boy was I wrong. The months passed and we eventually got back into our old routine, at least until I began to feel sick every morning. It didn't take long for me to figure out that I was pregnant, and even though we weren't trying, I was still very excited, and I ran to tell Lawrence. I was a bit concerned that he wouldn't be on board with the idea, but he was just as excited as I was, and instantly began to think up baby names and how we would eventually take our child on family road trips. I felt completely at ease and happy that Lawrence saw this as a blessing just as much as I did. That quickly changed, though, when we began to go to classes that would help us get ready for the birth of our baby. The classes were great and informative, but they mentioned how much it would cost to deliver a baby in a hospital, and I saw an odd glimmer in Lawrence's eyes when he heard that. The expression that he had on his face worried me greatly. A few weeks later, I came home to find Lawrence in the living room with a bunch of packages around him. Among them were a small, inflatable kiddie pool, some small towels, and several bottles of hand sanitizer. What is all this stuff?
This is for the delivery. I looked into it, and you can deliver your baby at home with stuff like this and save a lot of money.
Lawrence, what are you talking about? All I see are things you could get from the dollar store. You can't possibly think that this is a good idea to deliver a baby using this garbage?
All of this cost less than a fraction of what the hospital would cost. I've watched a bunch of videos online, and I know what I'm doing. We can do a home birth. It will work out.
But with a home birth, you would still need people, like a doula or even a nurse. Did you even think to hire such a person? Also, none of this will be enough for a delivery. That pool is way too small. And what is all the hand sanitizer for?
To clean you and the baby once it comes out. This will save us so much money.
You can't be serious. This is a recipe for disaster. This will kill me and our baby, but you don't even care just because you can save a few dollars? That was it. That was the last straw. It was bad enough that he had nearly killed me because he was so incredibly cheap, but now he was endangering our baby. And even if the delivery went well, I suddenly realized that the child would have a lifetime of potential issues because of this man. Angry, I tried to walk away, but Lawrence reached out and held me in place and wouldn't let me leave. And so I elbowed him in the nose, and then when he was stunned, I kicked him as hard as I could between the legs and left, and went over to my father's house. Unfortunately, he was not surprised to see me and welcomed me into his home. Within weeks, I filed for divorce. I wanted to get all of the trials over and done with before I had the baby, and thankfully my lawyer made sure that it happened. The judge looked over what had transpired over the course of our marriage and granted me sole custody of our baby, as it was plainly obvious that Lawrence was unhinged and made decisions that would endanger the lives of other people. The judge also granted me a large amount of child support and alimony for the same reasons. But since we only rented the home we lived in, the judge decided to let Lawrence continue to live there. I instead lived with my father, and after I gave birth to my daughter, it turned out to be the best place for me, as my father would look after her while I eventually went back to work. Once the divorce was completely settled, things really worked out for me. I lived with my father for a few years, but eventually I did meet someone else, and while he is far from perfect, he is nevertheless perfect for me and for my daughter as well. And Lawrence? Well, he never married again. In fact, he never dated again, as it cost too much money. As far as I can tell, he lives in an assisted living home as he began to lose his mind after we got divorced. He began to stop bathing as he saw it as an unnecessary expense. As if that wasn't bad enough, he began to eat only noodles as he thought that they were the cheapest and most cost-effective food, and as such, he began to gain a lot of weight. I'm actually surprised that he is still alive, to be honest. I do feel bad that he has gone so far downhill, but I also count my blessings as well that I was able to get out before he did. I honestly don't think that things would have gone differently for him whether I was in his life or not. The only difference, I think, was that he would have taken me down with him. You can disagree with me, though, and I honestly wonder what you think. As it turned out, Anna had never actually known my parents at all. She was a scam artist who was going to take the money from my grandparents and the jewelry she sold and run off with her young boyfriend. My name is Marie, and I'm 30 years old. I live on my own now, but I still live in the same city as my grandparents, who raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was young. Growing up, they were able to meet my needs and help me excel in school. It wasn't a perfect life, and they didn't spend much money on fun things we didn't need, like cool toys or family trips, but I still grew up feeling loved and supported. As I got older, I came to realize that my grandparents didn't spend much because they were saving up their money for their retirement and my inheritance after they died. During high school, their health began to decline, and I spent more and more of my free time taking care of them instead of the other way around. It was a rough time, not only because I was worried about my grandparents and losing them early, but because I didn't have much time to hang out with my friends or to apply to colleges and look for scholarships. To make matters worse, the colleges that I was able to apply to got back to me, and I got into my first choice. I was even eligible for a scholarship that would pay for my tuition, so my grandparents wouldn't need to pay for it out of pocket. The only problem was that the school was across the country, and my grandparents were doing worse than ever. I knew I couldn't just attend my dream school and leave them behind to suffer. I was at a loss for what to do, and I felt guilty. My grandparents and I always planned for me to go to college and get a good career, and none of us wanted me to lose that opportunity. The only way they would be taken care of was if I didn't go to college and stayed around to help them. It wasn't the path we wanted to take, but at the time it seemed like our only option. Just before graduation, I told my friends about our struggle. It doesn't look like I'll be heading to college after all.
What?
Why not?
My grandparents are too sick now. I can't just leave them in that state. They can't take care of themselves even when I'm around. Leaving them to fend for themselves while I'm across the country would just be cruel.
Why not find a caretaker for your grandparents?
Yeah. That way someone will be watching out for them and you can attend your dream school without a problem.
I don't know. My grandparents and I only have each other. I'm not sure if I want a total stranger coming into their house and staying with them all the time.
It's better than worrying about them from across the country or missing out on going to your dream college.
Besides, you have to move out and live on your own eventually.
Yeah, at some point, someone else is going to have to take care of your grandparents for you anyway.
I guess you're right. I still want to talk this over with my grandparents and see what they think. I spoke with my grandparents that night about getting a caretaker for them. They were hesitant to accept help from someone outside of our family, but they didn't want to keep me from going to college, so they decided to go along with it. Knowing how my grandparents and I felt, my friends had arranged for their parents and family members to check in on them every day and make sure their needs were met. They'd all met my grandmother and grandfather multiple times, so my grandparents didn't feel like they were letting strangers into their house. They seemed happy with the arrangement, and I was able to go to college like we always planned. After 4 years, I moved back home and planned on becoming their sole caretaker once again. It was rather difficult now that I had to find a good-paying job to be able to support all 3 of us. And once I finally did, it required me to be out of the house all day long, so I wouldn't be around to take care of my grandparents. We had to look for a caretaker again. My friends and their families had their own lives to worry about, so this time I knew we had to bite the bullet and hire someone from an agency. I had only been looking for a couple days when there was a knock on our front door, and when I answered, a middle-aged woman was standing there.
Hello, is this the Anderson household?
Yes, now who are you?
I'm Anna. I was a friend of your parents before they passed away all those years ago.
A friend? Of my parents? I could hardly believe it. I didn't have many memories of my parents before they died, so meeting a friend of theirs felt like fate. I immediately led her inside and introduced her to my grandparents. Anna told us stories of my parents from when she knew them, most of which my grandparents had never heard. We all just brushed it off. Children don't always tell their parents everything after all. Then Anna brought up the fact that we were looking for caretakers.
Am I to understand that you need someone to help your grandparents during the day?
Yes, that's right. My job has a great salary, but it requires me to be out of the house until dark, and Grandma and Grandpa need someone around to help them.
Well, I know you just met me, but from my friendship with your parents, I feel like I know so much about your grandparents already, and I'm in between jobs. Why don't I take care of them?
It sounded like a perfect deal. Anna was best friends with my mom, so she was basically family already. I still talked it over with my grandparents, and they quickly agreed to the deal. Anna started working the very next morning as soon as I left for work. The arrangement went well for a good while. Anna was home during the day and made sure my grandparents ate well and took their medicine, and she was able to meet all their needs. They couldn't have asked for anyone better. And then, when I was at home during my paid time off, I noticed things around the house, jewelry and small valuables, had been misplaced or were missing entirely. Things weren't where I would leave them, and my grandparents didn't know what was going on either. The only explanation was Anna. Hey, Anna.
Yes.
Have you noticed anything going missing around the house? Things not where you left them?
No, I don't know anything about that.
She seemed like she was telling the truth, so we all just accepted her word and moved on. It didn't cross our minds again until I noticed money going missing.
Marie, would you be a dear and get some more medicine for us?
There should be money in the desk drawer.
Of course! I'll be back as soon as I can. But when I went to the desk drawer, I couldn't find any money inside. My grandparents were sick, but they weren't forgetful, so I knew they hadn't forgotten to put the money there. There's no money.
But there has to be. I put it there this morning.
Ask Anna. She must have seen it when she was looking in there a while ago.
That was when I knew Anna had to be the one taking and misplacing everything. She was always in the house when things went missing, and I know it wasn't the rest of us. I just needed to be able to catch her in the act. Anna, since you've been doing such a wonderful job taking care of my grandparents, I wanted to get you something.
A teddy bear. How cute and thoughtful. Thank you.
Of course. I have to head back to work today. I'll see you tonight. All I had to do was wait and let Anna walk herself into the trap, and it worked. The next morning, the police arrived at the house and came looking for Anna. As soon as she heard the sirens of the police cruisers and looked outside, she began to panic. She tried to run out of the house through the backyard, but she didn't get very far before she slipped in a patch of mud and fell down. My grandparents and I had come to the window to watch, and we couldn't help laughing at her, on the ground and covered in mud. The officers caught up to her very quickly after that and put her in handcuffs before bringing her down to the police station. Once they sat her down in an interrogation room, she found her voice again.
What is the meaning of this? I haven't done anything wrong.
This video begs to differ. The police brought in a television and a video began to play. It showed Anna snooping around the house when she was alone and taking another jewelry and money that me and my grandparents had left out. Once she pocketed the money, she got a call from someone.
Oh, hi, James. You called at the perfect time. I just collected more money and jewelry to sell. These morons just keep it lying around for anyone to take.
Anna, can you bring me my medicine?
Ugh, hold on a moment, James. Shut up. I'll get to you when I get a minute. Sorry about that. The annoying couple here is always asking for something.
Anna, it's time for lunch. Can you make us some food?
Do it yourself. They're always asking me to do things for them. I can't wait to get out of here. Just think about it. In a few more months, I'll have taken all the money and valuables they can spare, and we'll be heading off to Europe before they even realize I'm gone.
As it turned out, Anna had never actually known my parents at all. She was a scam artist who was going to take the money from my grandparents and the jewelry she sold and run off with her young boyfriend. When she saw the post, I made online about needing someone to care for my grandparents. She did a little research and made up a backstory about having been friends with my mom. The police did a little investigating and found that we weren't even the first family she had done this to. She had a history of taking care of older people and gaining their trust just to steal money from underneath their noses and run off with it. She was successful too, until I gave her the teddy bear with a hidden camera inside of it. Because there was video proof of what she'd done, and a trail, she was arrested and charged with fraud and theft, and she went to jail. When my boss found out about what happened, she gave me a raise and helped me find a legitimate caretaker through an agency that would help my grandparents. Thankfully, there were no issues that time. My grandparents died recently, and I was thankful that we'd gotten Anna out of our lives by then. Now I know that my family can rest in peace without having to worry about me dealing with a con artist chasing after money.
I had only just sat back down for 1 minute when she burst back into the room and marched to the front, knocking over a photo of my grandmother, and not even pausing when it smashed on the ground. Everyone stared, open-mouthed at my boss, and I felt as though I were going to be sick. What are you doing?
You won't come to work because of the funeral, so I'll make sure there is no funeral until you leave.
My name is Joseph, and 2 weeks ago, my grandmother passed away. She was a huge influence in my life, and I was grieving heavily. I told my boss right away that I would need time for the funeral. Please, ma'am, my grandmother has just died. I will need some time off for the funeral. Is that okay? I'm giving you more notice than the policy says. My boss seemed okay at the time.
Of course, Joseph. I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma. You're our best employee. Take the day off and here. Have a gift card for our store as a token of my condolences. This is a hard time. If you need anything, just call.
My entire workforce had a tumultuous relationship with our boss. She was notorious for her mood swings. So hearing her give an immediate affirmative was such a relief. I spent the next 2 weeks working harder than ever, just to prove that I wasn't going to let them down after I was shown such kindness. The night before the funeral, I hung up my apron, nodded to my co-workers, and left. My boss didn't acknowledge me, and I didn't think anything of it. The next day, I got dressed in black and met my family at my grandmother's house. It was almost like she had never left. I could still smell her perfume, and her favorite hard candy was piled high in the bowl in the center of the coffee table. Her cat, a gray British Shorthair, mewled from her perch on top of the cabinet.
I'm so glad we're all here together today.
Yeah, it's such a shame that it takes something like this to bring us all together. Let's organize a night a month at the very least, where we all make an effort to meet up. How about that? That sounds lovely. In my pocket, I could feel my phone vibrating. I quickly silenced it and didn't think anything of it. Everyone who knew me knew I was at a funeral today, so it must have been a spam call. The cars rolled up outside the house, and just as I was climbing into the car, my phone started to ring again. I silenced it once again, but I was starting to get a bad feeling. Who could be ringing me so insistently? By the fourth time, my phone was ringing. My sister and my aunt were looking at my pocket nervously. When we got out of the car at the church, my sister pulled me aside.
You should just turn your phone off.
Yeah, you're right. I'll do that now. Just as I took my phone out to turn it off, I got another call. It was my boss. Hello?
Joseph, what the hell? Where are you?
I suddenly felt cold all over. What was my boss doing? She knew I was at a funeral. I'm at my grandma's funeral. I told you this.
Did you ask for time off?
Yes. You said you understood.
I said no such thing. You need to get to work right now.
You told me 2 weeks ago that I could have the day off. I gave you plenty of notice.
Do you have my agreement in writing?
My family were giving me weird looks, and everyone who had been standing around on the lawn were moving towards the church doors. No, I don't. Listen, I'm sorry, but I have to go into the funeral now. I hung up on her shouting and turned my phone off. I instantly knew that I was going to be in trouble at work the next day, assuming I still had a job. The idea of losing my job over this made me begin to panic.
Joseph, darling, the service is about to start. Come on.
I didn't have a choice to sit it out, nor did I want to. But most importantly, I had to set boundaries. I knew I had asked. I knew she had said yes. And so I knew that by leaving my grandmother's funeral to attend work would be letting her win. And this was not something she should have been fighting me on. So I went inside, sat down next to my mother and sister, and I mourned my grandmother's death and celebrated her life. Mary McDonald was a gracious woman. She was an active member of her church and community, and a doting parent to her 3 children. As a grandmother, she was unrivaled in her grandchildren's eyes. Mary left her mark on the world. Today, though we are saying goodbye to someone we dearly loved, to Mary McDonald, we share this song. The priest lifted his hymn book, and we all copied. Just as the pianist struck the first key, the doors at the back opened with an explosive slam, and everyone shifted in their seats, exclaiming in surprise over the intrusion. I turned around too, and gasped. It was my boss. She had on her work uniform, setting her quite apart from everyone else in the room who were wearing black. Her beady black eyes scanned the room, searching for me. I slid down in my seat, face burning red. What was she doing here?
Where is Joseph McDonald? What are you doing here? Do you have any idea how rude you're being? I'll have you know that I am a manager. I have a responsibility to my business, not to some pithy family get-together.
This is a funeral. Please have some respect.
I'm not leaving until I speak with Joseph McDonald. Joseph, you don't have to go. We can just call the police.
The funeral was already a spectacle. I can't imagine how letting it get worse would do anyone any favors. I sighed, shook my head, and then stood up. All of my relatives and family friends were glaring at my boss, and even though there was a heavy weight of guilt in my stomach, I felt better knowing that they weren't blaming me for her hateful behavior. This intrusion is highly unusual, as most people have the common decency to not break into a funeral for a chit-chat. But how about we continue on with things? I left the funeral hall to the sound of the piano striking up a slow, mournful tune, and voices suddenly joining in. The doors closed behind us, blocking out the sound of the singing, and then we were alone in the red-carpeted hallway. I couldn't hold back my shock and anger anymore. Do you have any idea how many lines you're crossing by being here? This is my grandmother's funeral. We both know I asked for permission. We both know you said yes. So, you can either leave or I'll call the police and have them escort you off the property. She gaped at me, and I waited for her to say something, but she didn't, so I left her alone and headed back inside. I had only just sat back down for 1 minute when she burst back into the room and marched to the front, knocking over a photo of my grandmother, and not even pausing when it smashed on the ground. Everyone stared, open-mouthed at my boss, and I felt as though I were going to be sick. "What are you doing?"
You won't come to work because of the funeral, so I'll make sure there is no funeral until you leave.
I was about to stand up. I didn't want my grandmother's funeral to be ruined because of me, but then my aunt grabbed my wrist and fixed me to the seat.
You will do no such thing. You've been warned already, so I'm calling the police. See if I care. I'm the boss of a store and I need my workers. They have jobs. They'll understand. And if I say that Joseph needs to be at work, then he does. That's my right.
I was astounded. I understood that they took their job seriously, but to think that she had the right to call me out of a funeral? To believe that the police would support her choice because of her position as a boss in a cafe? You're delusional.
You're delusional if you think you're going to keep your job after today. You're going to have to beg on bended knee for it back, and you'll be lucky if you get anything close to your current wage. And I know all the business owners in the area, so I know you won't be able to get another job. You need me.
Just leave before this gets worse. If she refuses to leave, we will continue to have the funeral around her. It's a bit unusual, but your grandmother insisted on having her will read immediately. The priest pulled out a big A4 envelope and had a solicitor join him on stage. Together, they started to read through the will. And to my oldest and hardest working grandchild, I grant my familial home and all of my stocks that I was given when I was 15 for a small mechanics business. I believe it has some worth now. The solicitor handed me the deed to the house and the details of the stocks. I choked. The stocks were for one of the biggest companies in the world. They were worth millions. However, included among them were stocks in the very company that I worked for. Not only that, but they would give me a controlling share of the company. Suddenly, I went from a low-level employee to essentially the owner of the company. Congratulations, boss, you've hijacked your last funeral. No more power trips for you. I couldn't believe just how quickly this had turned around, and I made sure to show her why I was so happy. The look on her face when she realized what I was showing her was priceless. 1 minute she was threatening my livelihood, and the next, I was in control of her employment. Suddenly, the police burst through the doors, and they ran up to my ex-boss. She tried to evade their attempts to catch her, but my family helped the police and they were able to catch and arrest her on the spot. They stopped to talk with the priest, but with a nod and a jerk of her arms, they escorted my boss out of the funeral hall to the cheer of everyone in attendance. I think that'll be the last I see of her for a while. Everyone laughed, but soon the funeral went on, and we told many stories of her life. Eventually, the funeral came to an end, and we all went to the wake and partied in my grandmother's name. A week later, I went to the prison to visit my ex-boss, who was still in jail. No one had posted her bail, and she was being held on charges of being a nuisance to the public and evading arrest. She had no friends because of her personality, and so she was alone.
What are you doing here?
I came to offer you the chance to apologize. You do understand how absolutely insane what you did was, right?
Surely you're joking. You're to blame for what happened, not me.
That's a shame. Especially since with my inheritance, I can choose whether or not you will still have a job or not, and honestly, considering how you behave both at work and in this situation, honestly, I wouldn't let you keep your job even if you weren't going to prison. And for a long time too, by the sounds of it.
Prison for what?
Trespassing, causing a disturbance, and after looking over the finances at work. There are some discrepancies in the accounts that you control. So much so that I had to report them to the police. All you had to do was apologize, and I would have forgiven you. And instead of just being fired, you would have avoided going to prison. But not you are both going to prison and being fired. Maybe your time in prison will help you to see the error of your ways, but I won't hold my breath. I was ready to feel bad for you, but you're just a spiteful old witch who doesn't care about people's feelings. Your concern is solely whether people find you important or not. But now you don't have to worry. No one will ever think you're important again. And then I left and went to my job as the owner of the cafe.